And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother to the temple, coming to us fresh off the heels of the Fragged Empire 2nd edition, now coming back with Fragged Kingdom in its own 2nd edition, the one and only Wade Dyer. How you doing today, man?
G'day, Mildred. Nice to chat with you again.
Mm-hmm. I believe it's technically late afternoon where you are.
Yeah, time zones do funny things. In fact, it's pretty ideal for me just after midday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that's the case. So now, obviously, I did that impressions video on Fragged, which thank you for sending me the material to go over that. It was once again tricky to find a way to summarize 500 pages worth of material, but I think I pulled it off. But I suppose when it came to doing a 2nd edition of Fragged Kingdom, was this something that immediately the groundwork was laid as you were doing the 2nd edition of Fragged Empire?
Yeah, so once I did my 2nd edition of Fragged Empire, because Fragged Empire, my sci-fi, that's my flagship game, so it had to be the first one to get a 2nd edition. And that really did take my rules structure to the next level, to something I'm particularly proud of. And then it was a pretty obvious choice to now start to do some 2nd editions of some of my other IPs. So my 3 main worlds are Fragged Empire, my sci-fi, Fragged Kingdom, my techno-magic fantasy, and Fragged Eternum, my gothic horror. Now, oddly enough, Fragged Kingdom is actually not the second most popular, but I thought it was the one that was in most need of a 2nd edition, because I didn't feel like my setting was quite what I wanted it to be, my world building, and the rules were, while I was still quite proud of them, I thought there was a lot of room for improvement, and so that's why I decided to jump in both feet with Fragged Kingdom 2.
Oh yeah, I can get that. Now, with Fragged Empire, there wasn't necessarily a big lore change, but more of a further establishing of its particular setting. But with Fragged Kingdom, you elected to make a time jump and lean a lot further into techno magic. You know, jumping the timeline ahead about, I think it was 200 years, and expanding it. Yeah. What prompted that move?
So, when I'm creating an RPG world, I often like to create these pillars. And these pillars are sort of either a theme or a key idea, and you sort of lock those in place, and you build everything around that. So for one of those pillars for Fragged Empire, what it was that it was the dawn of a new age. Like it was just now returning to space, and nobody knows what's out there or what the future holds. And so you had this. It would be destroying that pillar if I had advanced the timeline. Because that was one of the big pillars for Fragged Empire. But for Fragged Kingdom, I didn't feel like that was. I felt like I needed to create new pillars, and I didn't feel like that was one of the ones for Fragged Kingdom. And so I thought, okay, there's so much I want to change. I want to change the world to have. I want nations, I want politics, I want borders and castles, and I want the pleasure of noble hierarchies because that's one of the great things about a medieval setting. Like I wanted some more of that established world, and so I thought, okay, there's a bunch of other things I want to do as well, but I also didn't want to destroy the lore that I'd already done. I don't like it when I think it leaves a bad taste in fans' mouths when their lore gets destroyed, And so what I thought the best thing to do was actually leave all of that stuff that I'd done in first edition. Like, that's there, that happened, that's part of the history of the world. But then to get all this extra stuff that I wanted, and, you know, I thought, okay, I could push the timeline forward a couple of 100 years. That's enough time to really have all this extra stuff that I wanted, a lot of stuff to be changed and develop and grow, but not so far from what happened in first edition that it's sort of mythical. Like that, the effects, the big Druidic War, for example, is still seen and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, the concept of the Druidic War certainly fits the post-apocalypse pillar that's also present in Empire. I remember when I asked you about this when I was setting up that video, and you described the original kingdom as the last city on Earth, whereas this new one is leaning far more into techno magic. And
yes, yep.
This was something I did bring up in that video, because with both Empire and now Kingdom, the vibe that I'm getting that you wanted to, maybe I'm reading too much into this. You didn't want either to be treated as the melting pot when it comes to their genre. I've talked about in the past the Tolkien melting pot, for instance, with fantasy, where when it comes to that whole generic pastiche, and when setting isn't quite established, I can see people using it that way. But it sounds like one of the goals with both Empire and Kingdom is to further establish this is a game that's built for this particular setting.
Yeah, so that's I feel like there's a couple of themes in there you're touching on. That one of, obviously, Tolkien is like that is like the ground zero for modern fantasy, you know, and so a lot of stuff could feel like that. I think that's one theme. Oh man, I don't know, like. I never really set out to not create a Tolkien-esque world, if that makes sense. I think I like to just sort of... Sometimes I like to start with creative ideas and run with it and just see where they lean. And sometimes that has some familiarity in it and sometimes some freshness in it. So like one thing, for example, okay, there's no elves classic. There's no Tolkien-esque elves or dwarves or humans or even horses in my Fragged Kingdom 2 setting. I wanted that to feel quite fresh and original in that sense, but at the same time, it still feels comfortably like a lot of like you're gonna, if you're familiar with modern fantasy, you'll be able to slip into this world quite comfortably. Okay, but then, was my rules created specifically for my setting? Actually, I would say it's not. I actually don't even think for my Fragged Empire work. I think yes, there's a chunk of it is designed for my setting. For example, when I'm creating stats for my individual species, you know, and my types of arcane powers and how they work and the sort of mechanics there. But there's always, in all of my books, I've always strongly encouraged homebrewing. And I even have dedicated some pages in my books giving guidelines. Hey, if you want to make your own species, here's some recommendations on how to do that, or making your own items or your own traits, how to do that. Also, feel free to change the name of anything. You know, okay, yes, it may be a plasma rifle. You can just change that to be a normal rifle if you want, or a laser rifle, or you know, maybe it's a wand. Like, I don't care what you name stuff. The stats, it's sort of designed to be narratively flexible but mechanically robust is how I've gone to frame things. Because I also get particularly excited when people grab my rules and then adjust them to their own world. Now, that being said, obviously Fragged is not a generic RPG that's designed with that in mind. It's more designed, if you do want to homebrew stuff, go nuts. Because I grew up homebrewing all the time when I was getting into RPGs as a teenager. So, Yeah, I greatly encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can get that. And before I get to my next question, hold that thought for one moment. I need to hit the BRB for a minute.
No worries.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. But to get into what I was about to get to before I got interrupted, I want to talk a bit on technomagic, since that is a very interesting and a very deliberate choice. I think this was some... And what made you want to focus so much of Kingdom 2 on that in particular?
I think it sort of comes back to one of those pillars that I was talking before. So a couple of the pillars that I thought when I was sort of going over the Fragged Kingdom lore and where I thought its potential lied, what's the most interesting bits are. I thought the technological magic, I thought, was definitely one of the most fun bits. The other bit, I think, is mythologizing its sort of scientific roots, sci-fi roots. So there was two different questions I had with this one. So one is, I thought mythologizing the sci-fi roots is, for example, the goddess of commerce and fortune and water. Her name is Corp, which is named after the mega corporation from Fragged Empire, you know. Mm-hmm. So you kind of like that stuff gives people a bit of a chuckle and like, I kind of get it, you know. Mm-hmm. And then the sci-fi magic one, there's a really different approaches we could have gone with this one. So you've got the sort of Numenera sort of approach, which is effectively just sci-fi people using gadgets. They have no idea how it works, and just stuff happens. Superpower stuff happens. And then you've got the other side that just looks really like classic fantasy magic with staves and wands, and but you say but it's technology, okay? But I'm like, oh, okay, but it's still glowy runes and people with pointed hats doing it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I kind of tried to strike. So I sort of had those two poles in my mind. And one part of it is you commission the artist to do stuff, and because I'm indie, because it's me working from home, I don't have a large budget. You give artists a brief, they come up with something. I don't have the money to have them. And so there is one part where you just kind of end up with what the artist thinks looks cool, which is actually not a bad place to do, because artists are professionals at making things look cool and fresh and interesting, okay? And so one part of it is the aesthetic did sort of just evolve as I commissioned an art piece and then another art piece and another art piece. You sort of come up with this nice aesthetic, and I think, and part of it, you know, I can weight those because I'm writing the briefs and I'm giving instructions. We came up with a format that looks, how do you put this? It looks really classically fantasy in the fact that, like, you've got staves and orbs and wands and things like that. And, but then those things look really and obviously technological. Okay. So, it's just hard to do without visuals. Okay. And because, and I thought, and I think that's, yeah. Anyway, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tricky one. Hopefully the vibe that I've struck really resonates with people and feels nice. Yeah. Also, I think I chose it because I think it's such an interesting thing. Like that classic saying of sufficiently superior magic is sufficiently superior technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Do you know the other half of that?
No, I don't. What's the other half? I've forgotten it. I probably did know it, but I've obviously forgotten it.
Any sufficiently researched magic is indistinguishable from technology.
That's cool. I like that. And there's a reason that saying has resonated with so many people, and it's got into our psyche as a culture. Especially us as, you know, nerds and RPGers and fantasy and sci-fi fans. Like the fact that you and I know that quote tells us that that's resonating as something deeply interesting to people. It's obviously such a robust idea that there's a lot to be explored there, and there's a reason. And I hope my worlds, I want to ask people interesting questions. I want GMs and players to have interesting questions posed to them, and then they go and answer what's the exact nature of that. Like in your own campaign, it might take on a slightly different flavor than it does in my campaign. Like maybe you end up a little Warhammer 40k-ish with like the machine spirit, you know, wandering around sort of take on it, or you could end up with something a little bit more classically fantasy, but with like the glowing runes look like code or something like that. Yeah, and it provides a framework for magic as well, because magic can be very much a black box, do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you kind of know, this is technology, you know, it gives a structure to the magic, so you know what magic can and can't do, and how you can interact with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like a counterspell might be an EMP burst, or a fireball is a grenade. You know.
Yeah. I can say that with one of my settings that I've developed. I've treated magic in the sense that it's akin to first off the whole Clark the first and second half of Clark's Law. It embodies both of them because magic and technology grow up alongside each other. Mostly because I've seen my fair share of magic versus technology narratives, and I wanted to ask the question: what if they were both a part of each other, like a Taiji or a Yin Yang? the other thing is that it is treated in a manner similar to computer code. In a sense that you have a collection of symbols that, when put together in a certain way, are going to create a particular effect, and are very, very, very precise on that effect. And it's kind of drawing upon a couple of things. One of them being the whole this place is just code, and code can be modified thing from the Matrix. But also the fact that so many spells in games are very fire and forget. It's meant a fireball is going to do that one thing that a fireball does and not anything else. But then I ended up thinking of people like script kiddies or different types of hackers, and the fact that you have plenty of games that have the ability to tweak or mess with spells. And I started drawing parallels between that and, of all things, and this might be me showing my age, but the burgeoning rise of import tuner culture back in the 2000s.
That's interesting. And I think this sort of question of how does the arcane work within your fantasy world is one of the most interesting things for people to explore. Like, people love picking up a novel and it's a new world, and you're like, oh, how does the arcane roles work? And how do monsters work? How do these cultures interact? It's exploring and figuring out this stuff. It's kind of one of the most fun things. And so, like, one of the things I've also done in my world is I've got different types of arcane. So, like, there's techno magic, but then there's also enchantment. And so enchantment is basically psychic magic, which is to do with mind and time within the Fragged worlds. But then I've also got essence, which is to do with these spirits, which are these called like these Farron, and you basically collect them like Pokemon, and you can do magic from them. And then you've got all power, which is a very monk-like paladin-esque
I feel like you're pandering to me with that one.
Well, a little bit. Dude, I gotta send you some of my art of some of my monks.
Yeah.
And one of my main characters in my book, she's a monk, but she's Gwenye is her name, and she's a half-blood. She's part Drasim, which is this dragon type species, and Twyfar, which is this sort of energy species. But she's a monk who struggles with not being angry all the time. And she's like always talking about, oh, the other monks are so serene and peaceful, and why can't I be like that? And so it's her sort of struggling with that side of things. But yeah, you totally dig that.
Yeah. And I will always appreciate when not only there's a defined setup with magic, but multiple angles of it. Because when you look in different settings and the way different cultures are going to be viewing magic in a given setting, there's no reason for it to operate the same way. I've spoken very fondly of the magic systems that are in, say, Legend of the Five Rings, just as an example, and trying to treat them as the typical Western fantasy mage does not quite work, because that's not what they're doing. In that particular, because I'm not sure how familiar you are with L5R, but one of the primary,
a little bit, but not deep though.
Yeah, one of the primary quote unquote mages are Shugenja, who have less in common with the wizard in their tower and have more in common with, say, a Taoist priest. Because because their spell casting is them asking the elemental kami in an area to perform a service, and you can only do that so much. And worst case scenario, the kami might just completely blackball you, and you can't.
Well, Yeah, and this is, I think, an interesting question is that you have all these different types of characters that people can play, and part of it is you want to provide narrative potential, but also narrative framework. So the narrative framework helps people actually play. You know, it creates a shared bond of expectations between you and other players and the GM, but you also want the potential there because you want reasons for drama or certain stories to flesh it out. So, for example, the Dyer in my world is a little bit similar to what you were saying, where they deal with this essence magic, where they basically borrow power from spirits, but they kind of collect spirits a little bit like Pokemon. You have a little collection, and you can only draw power from the spirits that you have a connection with. And so it becomes you've got to be on good terms with them.
Yeah.
These are people. These are people with their own wills and intent and interests, and they're very alien and strange creatures. Like technically they're Farron, which may be potentially real aliens if you know Fragged Empire. So that's one type, and that's so different to techno magic, where you're like dealing with, scripts and machinery and tubes and engines. Like it's a different type of story is being told for these different spheres. Yeah.
Yeah, I can get that. Now, I did also notice that a lot of the rule refinements that you had in Empire have made their way over into Kingdom, especially things like equipment. When it comes to that, were there any major changes that you had made from Empire 1 to 2 that in trying to bring that over to Kingdom didn't quite fit, or was it mostly a cinch?
Yeah, okay, so there was a couple of things. So to basically give away the final answer, the big one is obviously Frag Kingdom has a much larger focus on melee than Empire, and so Empire is basically a weapons list is like 90% guns and one melee weapon as an exotic weapon. And that means a lot of cover and that sort of stuff. A lot like gun combat is very much about your environment a lot and your positioning to do with your terrain. And whereas you go into melee combat, it becomes very different. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to come up with a distinction between a dagger and a spear. That's not just damage and hit chance. Like your actual reach is an important thing. And as soon as you're dealing with melee, you're less dealing with your environmental cover and more to deal with your positioning of your other people in the party. And so figuring that out, and then I changed. There's like a munitions rules. I changed into a momentum rules. It's a bit of a change there. Okay, so that's giving away the end thing. Was it a cinch? So when I started playtesting Frag Kingdom with my friends, my regular gaming group, I feel so sorry for them because when I started Frag Kingdom 2 playtesting, I went wild with some of what I was intending to do. And it was a brutal playtest. Oh my goodness, was it brutal. I was basically upheaving the entire rules every week. And I did that for about 3 months. But luckily I was blessed with some really good friends who were really, really good with rules. There was a lot of them laughing at me as I was doing these complete remakes every week, and I took it upon myself to apologize a lot to them, especially some of them have their characters completely butchered all the time. So that's not much fun. Like I'm sympathetic because that's hard. These guys are like volunteering and coming to my house, and they're still having fun, and the game's being played, and we're enjoying each other's company. But it's a little bit jarring to go through that process. So it was pretty brutal. In many ways, Fragged Empire 2 was easier to make than Frag Kingdom 2, which is so odd considering the fact that Frag Kingdom 2 came afterwards. But I'm immensely happy where Frag Kingdom 2's ended up, and I've also refined I've further refined my ideas that I had in Fragged Empire 2, which is just the natural progression.
Right.
My next book is always better than the one before it, and when I do Fragged Eternum 2 after this, it will be better than Frag Kingdom 2. That's just a given. But it will also be a very different, it feels different. You want people to feel different when they play Fragged Empire. I want it to feel very different to Frag Kingdom 2, but I want to reward people. They've put all the effort into learning my rule system. I want them to be able to apply that to all the different games that I've got. If you're going to sit down and learn a new RPG, that's a big investment. I want you to get not your money and your time's value out of that. And that's part of the reason why I like Frag Kingdom 2 being built with the same rules structure of Fragged Empire 2.
Yeah. I can certainly get that. And I can see the transition from munition to momentum and the like. But one of the other big transitions from one to two that I think is worth getting into is shifting away from the nation building and into this camp system.
Yes.
And I did comment on this when I did that impressions video, where I can understand why from my perspective, why it was done, because when you have more established nations, the idea of nation building doesn't quite make as much sense. And one of the big parts of the fantasy with Empire is having and maintaining the ship. The whole get a ship, get a crew, keep flying is a big part of the fantasy. But it's kind of hard to do that with a holding or a nation because they don't move, with some some very rare exceptions.
You'd basically need to do what some fantasy games do, where you're like, oh no, maybe you have a flying boat or something like that. You'd have to build your whole world around it to make that work.
Or the massive moving cities a la Mortal Empires.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been done, but it would have been a very different sort of world than what I wanted to build. So when I first made the Frag Kingdom 2, when I was developing the rules, for the longest time I'd kept the nation building stuff in there. And I even had all these rules, and I did a whole campaign using nation building where my players built up a frontier town, and they're like, okay, what new infrastructure are we gonna develop? Are we gonna develop the woodcutters or the farmers, or maybe our merchants? And they end up developing a merchant town. And that worked, and I've got all those rules sitting on my computer. But I decided to move to the camp system for a couple of reasons. One is I really want exploration to be a big part of the game. I kind of had to just follow the fun. And I think even though I love nation building, to me as a person, that is deeply interesting. I found that would narrow the types of games that people were playing in Frag Kingdom, and it didn't, as you were saying, I don't think it matches the world as much anymore as what it did in first edition. And I found that the camp system that I developed was just a lot more fun, a lot more intimate, a lot more personal, which is something the spaceships had from Fragged Empire. And it also facilitated you moving around, exploring and going to new environments and stuff like that. So I'm very happy with the camp system. I think it works. It's going to create a lot more diverse range of games. But in the future, I would love to do a little booklet on nation building as an optional sort of something. Yeah.
And given that, I could easily see more so than first. Frag Kingdom second edition lending itself well to hex crawl kind of campaigns. I'm pretty sure you've done that at least once in one of your play tests.
I'm actually doing it right now with my current group.
This is why all my friends call me Negrodamus. because they seem to have an uncanny ability for predicting these kind of things and being usually right on it. But the reason I bring that up is I'm curious if in further developments you plan on doing some sort of encounter or event table that lends itself more to that kind of hex crawl, that kind of West March type of play.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the question is, like, have I got much of a plan to do supplements for specialized styles of campaigns? Like hex crawls, like nation building. I mean, you could do like a political game, could be another type of one, or survivalist game. Look, I'll be pretty honest. I think the likelihood of me being able to do all of those is pretty small. I would love to do them, you know, and in fact, I've kind of designed little rules for a lot of those things, as I just like to play different types of campaigns myself. The reason I probably think it unlikely to happen is mostly it's a matter of funds. I tend to pour pretty much nearly all of my money back into my core books. This is why my core books looks so amazing, is because I put so much time and money into them. I think if suddenly I turn out to be the next Shadow Dark, and make $1 million on my crowdfunding campaign, then sure, I will go nuts. I promise you, I will make all the things and they will all be amazing. Like, I could make that money go further than pretty much most people, but yeah, it's all going to come down to that. Yeah, is just available funds. That's yeah.
Yeah, I could certainly see that. And this was kind of hinted at earlier, but I do appreciate that you have a whole section just on homebrewing, because while homebrewing is going to be inevitable, as I've said many times, nobody plays Uno as written. I think at the very least, us as designers can throw a bone to make the job a little bit easier, so that it's not just someone jumping right into the deep end of the pool off of the high dive. And swim, damn it.
I think it's also, I like it when designers put it into their game, because they're also telling people, hey, this is part of my design intent of the product that I've created. My intent is for you to go nuts, or go and make up your own stuff, but not in a bad way. The bad way of doing that is saying, hey, my game is not balanced and is lacking content, and I expect you to go and fix it.
The Bethesda and Simbeta approach.
Yeah, we all know several of those that come to our mind when I say that. That's the bad side of that. The other side is that, hey, I've created this awesome thing, and I want you to mod it to do extra stuff. And here's a little, here are some cornerstones and some key points to keep in mind. And hey, come to my Discord community and share it with people. They love it when people come in at homebrewing things. Like, yeah, very welcomed.
It did give me a chuckle when I saw the homebrew hacks of, like, turning Fragged Empire into Mass Effect, or turning Fragged Kingdom into Endless Legend, which is apropos because Endless Legend's getting a sequel soon.
Yeah, I heard about that one.
and knowing the Endless universe, I can see why that would be used, because there are some significant parallels. Especially with the way dust works.
Yeah, and especially to do with my ley line dust and my nanites, and dude, I even in Frag Kingdom, I even call it Nyx dust, which is this sort of magical, invisible thing that goes around and empowers stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there's a few crossovers with that that setting.
And since dust is in game, it's treated as your money, but in universe, it is self-assembling and nanites that can do that can do just about anything you want it to. that kind of thing was a inevitability. And yeah, I will be keeping an eye on Endless Legend 2 to see if they have put in better combat, because that was always the problem with the first one. Wasn't bad, just kind of hands off. But shifting to one of the things I did want to highlight when it came to camps was the almost tech tree like design you have with developments. It's not a direct 1-to-1 tech tree, but in that escalating amount of time for each project.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah, and that's it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
But were tech trees that are in like 4X games and Total War games kind of an influence?
So I mean, obviously, like I've never actually done a tech tree before in a frag game. Normally, I have a really free range. You don't get this before you can get that type of design structure. And this is not quite that still. Like, you can skip things like, just to give people who are listening here. So with your developments, if you want to increase your rest attribute, one of the things you can do is to get a developments. Like, the first one is a bedroll, and then a bivouac sack, or tents and pavilions, and then you get guards and arcane lamps and stuff like that, and they all give you bonuses to that. I wanted something to help the communal feel, like how do you put this? I want to hit multiple things here with this. This is why I did this. So one is I wanted something simple and easy, because if it's complicated, what happens is 1 or 2 players in your party will manage the camp, and no one else will look at it. Okay? So you want it to be, the rules to be simple enough so as that every single person at the table can very easily have opinions on what to do with the party's camp and how to develop it. Secondarily, you want this idea of upgrading your camp, this sense of progression. We start off as like, with a changed shirt and a rusty longsword, and a bedroll, and then eventually we end up in, I'm a knight with magical full plate and a 2-handed axe, and I've got an entourage of guards and, a pavilion and banner with my camp. That sort of stuff. That sense of we are growing, we are developing in our status, mechanically and also within the world. People like that, the chemicals in the human body, love that stuff. Thirdly is, I did have this third thing in my mind and I had a mental blank. I did have a third thing for it, but I can't remember it, so maybe it'll come back in my head later on. But
something else I had brought up, and in the impressions video, was that this was decently timed because of in the wake of, say, the Pathfinder games that Owlcat has made. I haven't played Rogue Trader, so I don't know if this was carried over into it as well. But in those, when you're doing traveling, the roles within camps are very important. And barring that, I could always bring up the Oregon Trail, where how fast you travel can have its own risks. And yes, some of those risks involve dying of dysentery. I have to make that joke. But shifting to, I remember one of the big things that stood out, and maybe this was in Kingdom first, and I just didn't see it, is the arcane rule. Is that something that's new to second edition, or was that in first?
So arcane roles have been in Fragged for a while, but they're substantially developed now. Also, I did finally remember my third thing to do with the camp. I'll be really quick. It's just a way of rewarding characters who are more craftsmen or merchants. We'll call them downtime specialists. Players who are really good at that, camps give them an extra outlet to do stuff. So the arcane rules, I've been developing them with each new edition of Fragged, and I feel like they're getting better and better with each one. And it's a very complicated thing because there are so many ways you can do arcane rolls. So the way I've traditionally done them is actually very open-ended, quite open-ended, in that you make a skill roll and the GM, tells you what sort of skill you want to do, and different arcane rolls have themes, and it basically gives you extra stuff that you can do with your skills. So, say, for example, you're a psychic in Fragged Empire, leadership skill will also now allow you to dominate the minds of other people. Persuasion will allow you to subtly manipulate their minds, and insight might allow you to read their thoughts, their surface thoughts, okay? So it kind of expands the topics that each skill covers, is what an arcane roll does. So Frag Kingdom 2 still has that expansion sort of idea and makes a skill, okay, so it covers these 4 topics, and if you're an arcane user, how you get a bonus topic that the skill covers. But what I've also done is I've created a set of much more mechanically robust sort of things that you can do, specifically focusing on so that kind of skill expansion covers the non-combat narrative side of play, but then as soon as you get into combat, there's a big set of different stuff you can do. So let's say, for example, you've got like blast or create a barrier, or move someone. Okay, there's like a bunch of them in the book, but then each type of arcane user gets a modification to that. So, for example, an all-power monk is going to be much better at creating barriers, and their blast is actually them punching someone. So you need to be in someone's face before you can do your attack arcane roll. But let's say, for example, you're an essence user. You're much better at blasting people, so you actually deal extra damage when you do blast, okay? But you can't create barriers, but you can create like fiery walls that hurt people if they cross them. So trying to, because I want to create, now, the difficult thing to do, and the thing that I'm proud of, is I want something that's a system that is easy to use, okay, so not very mechanically complicated, doesn't take up much page space in the book. I don't want to fall into the D&D trap of saying here is 50 pages of spells, but also has a great amount of narrative potential and empowers the creativity of the person who's making arcane rolls, because arcane rolls in Fragged are designed for the type of player that likes to get narratively creative, who likes to think of, I've got this power, what is a weird application for it, So, for example, in my last campaign, I had a time mage, and she liked to come up with all sorts of reason as to why her manipulating time could give her different benefits. She's like, okay, well, I want to debuff the enemy's defense, so I'm going to slow them down, and stuff like that. She gets that creative application is quite useful. It's like this, when you like Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the most awesome things about that was watching people getting cooler and cooler with their bending powers. It wasn't just because their bending powers were getting stronger and stronger. It was also they were thinking about new applications of them. Water bending. Oh, you splash people. All of a sudden, right near the end, you go, oh my goodness, you could like manipulate the blood in people's bodies and move them like puppets.
Or just taking things indirectly, like the lightning redirect, which was born out of studying waterbenders.
Exactly, and I think that's actually one of the most beautiful things about that world, is that sort of the magic evolved not because some new thing was brought in, but a new use of the parts that were already there. And I like to encourage that in my Frag games, like saying, okay, this is enchanting, which is to do with mind and time and sort of the moving of Nyx dust. Okay, the rules flesh it all out there. I gave you a bunch of example applications of it, and that's enough for your game. You can go nuts with that, and that will do it for you just fine. But if you're a really creative person, I want you to get creative with your justification of like how you use it to get different sorts of benefits. Okay. Yeah, and so that's I'm trying to do that, and that's I'll be straight up. It's a very difficult thing to do. What I'm trying to create is something monolithically difficult, trying to make something easy and deep and complicated but robust and usable, and all the things. I want all the things, and I'm nudging closer and closer and closer to that with each version of my Fragged books. And so I think Frag Kingdom is definitely better than everything previously that I'd done, and I've done and I'm quite proud of that, what I've come up with there. And I think most people won't get what I'm trying to do when they read the rule book, but for those few people who do get it, it will blow their minds.
And when it comes to that kind of free form, the big thing that I've always suggested and have kind of had as a mantra is guidance. Especially and something that certainly helps is something that my good friend RC Chris, who I had on a few days ago, had talked about, and that is that power sets become more interesting through limitation. Like through establishing not only what it can do, but what it can't do, and what the drawbacks are of what it can do.
Yep. So I can give you some of the examples of that. So I'm just gonna see if I can open my book and I can get right to it. So for example, so there's a big one like the techno magic is pretty like there's sort of examples of stuff when your arcane rolls go bad. So this is sort of an easy one. So the techno magic often will blow up in your face. If it's Dyer to do with spirits, the spirits might get angry or misunderstand you, and you sort of have to soothe your relationship with them. Or if it's to do with the all power, the all being, who you're sort of praying to for your abilities, decides that they're going to try and get you to trust them more, or to test your faith in some way, or refine your character at the most inopportune time, so that sort of stuff. But there is also very much it can't do certain things, like enchantment is just mind and time and the moving of dust. It's nothing else. You cannot create fireballs, you can't. And if you go with techno magic, it's like it could just do what the technology does. You can't do it's sort of like these limited spheres of influence of each of the arcane things. I
can get that. And there was hinting of a spheres of power kind of listing with a lot of the abilities, kind of areas of, I won't say areas of expertise, that doesn't sound right, but areas of what it can do, so that there's at least a direction to build around.
It's telling you this is the spheres of power of this arcane source. This is what it can do. It can only connect it to these things.
I can get that. Now within the setup, obviously, with the original one, it was one book. With this one, much like with Empire, it's split into a rules book and a lore book. But I'm guessing that within both, you do have plans for certain story seeds. I know that there was the example characters you put in, say, the lore book to illustrate each of the major races, for instance. And within that, are there any plans on putting in not necessarily a full-on adventure, but just kind of an idea or a suggestion to get a GM off the ground?
So I'm hoping, I'm not hoping, I'm going to be releasing also a soft cover adventure along with these two, the rule book and the setting guidebook.
Mhm.
And that will be a 40-page soft cover, pretty cheap in terms of cost. Adventure that'll be pre-written one with some pre-made characters in it, and that's the idea, is to sort of get you going. You can jump into that, and it's got everything that you need.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do one, and then of course, if we get enough funding, I'd like to do a second one, because it's always nice to have a couple. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, I believe the backer kit is going to be launching in about 2 months, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
What are you shooting for? Like 30 days on that one, or 60, or how long?
So no, it'll just be a 30-day campaign, and it'll launch in a little less than 2 months. I'm looking forward to that. And then after that, I'll have there'll be an opportunity for some late pledges afterwards. But I'm hoping, I'm going to be using backer kit, but I plan on having you've already seen the books. I've sent you the PDFs. They are mostly done. And my plan is to have them basically all done by the time I launch, is my hope. Because I'm wanting to give people a really smooth experience in terms of when they get them and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, all there's always turmoils with shipping and production and global economics and stuff like that. But I'll that's my job to navigate those, not the community.
Yeah, I can certainly get that, and I'll definitely be looking forward to seeing how all of that develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here. And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.